Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Heather Flannery. I'll be the moderator of this event. I am the founder and chief executive officer at ConsenSys Health and a proud co-sponsor of the Vichy initiative. That's Veterans Incentivized Coordination and Integration, a novel public health intervention focused on the needs of veterans, their families, and caregivers. I'm here joined today with a set of esteemed co-panelists, and we are looking forward to explaining this initiative to you and particularly the strategic partnership between Linux Foundation Public Health and ConsenSys Health with respect to the Vichy initiative. I'd like to begin just with some quick housekeeping. You are automatically, when you join, on listen-only mode. We are leaving time at the end of this event to address questions from the audience, and we're eager to do so. I encourage you to please capture your questions in the Q&A dialog box in the Zoom chat. We won't be reviewing them or seeing them until the Q&A segment, and I will be reading those questions and directing them to the panelists as time permits, and we'll do our utmost to follow up afterwards on each of those questions. So with that, I'd like to begin introductions for each of our panelists, beginning with Daniela. Daniela, over to you, please.
Oh, I got to unmute. Heather, thank you for joining, for inviting us and putting this webinar together. It's a fantastic way to start off the year. This is my first webinar and virtual speaking event, and I'm delighted to be with you, Heather, again. My name is Daniela Barbosa. I am the General Manager at Linux Foundation for Healthcare, Identity, and Blockchain. So that comprises of a lot of different projects, and hopefully we'll hit upon them today during this session. I've been here at the Linux Foundation for the last 4.5 years, serving as Vice President of Worldwide Alliances, and recently also took over as the Executive Director for Hyperledger. As we think about how the Linux Foundation and open source in general supports projects like this and initiatives, as we're going to be discussing today, it's really a place to build communities. And I hope that today's session, we can spend some time showing the audience and the participants how to get involved in these projects, how to contribute, and how to leverage a lot of the open source communities that the Linux Foundation for the last 20 years has put together. So once again, Heather and the rest of the panelists, I look forward to this conversation and sharing with you a little bit more about the Linux Foundation and our open source projects.
Thank you so much, Daniela. It's an honor to have you here today. Over to you, Jim. Looking forward to your introduction.
Thank you very much, Heather. I am the Executive Director for Linux Foundation Public Health and work very closely with Heather as a member and ConsenSys Health, as well as Daniela with Hyperledger and healthcare activities in Linux Foundation. Linux Foundation has thousands of open source projects, and Linux Foundation Public Health is one of our newer activities specifically focused on an industry sector, healthcare, and being able to provide open source tools and open source ecosystems to advance digital health. While I've only been with Linux Foundation for approximately 4 months, I've had the pleasure to know Heather and the ConsenSys Health team in this space for about 5 years, and was thrilled to be able to be in a position to collaborate with them. In fact, specific to the areas of veterans health, speaking as a veteran, I think it's a perfect confluence of ConsenSys Health activities with the intended activities of Linux Foundation Public Health. You know, in many ways, veterans health constitutes population health as a subset or an example of the ecosystem. U.S. veterans are a multifaceted population with a very distinct culture, as everyone immediately recognizes, but also represent many of the facets of U.S. culture nationally overall. Veterans experience a great deal of challenges with chronic care management, mental health disorders, post-traumatic stress, and other unique injuries associated with their service and service disabilities at a disproportionate rate to their civilian counterparts. So it really is a prime example of an opportunity for new and innovative open source and decentralized solutions together. You know, there are approximately 49,000 American veterans that are unfortunately homeless and face difficulties with social determinants of health, not only at the same rate as non-veterans, but unique to their population as well. So we're very excited to be able to work together and collaborate with ConsenSys Health as part of LFPH to identify and focus on new open source opportunities to advance these areas. And I can even add that we just had our governing board meeting this morning. They were very excited about the premise of creating a steering committee between both organizations to be able to bring in stakeholders and advisors and advance this. So thank you very much for inviting me this morning, Heather, and thrilled to be able to participate.
Thank you so much, Jim. We're honored for the opportunity to collaborate with Linux Foundation and Linux Foundation Public Health as well. I'd like to turn introductions to our ConsenSys Health Vice President, Decentralized Trials and Digital Health, who is also serving as the Executive Director within ConsenSys Health for the Vichy initiative. Dr. Wood, over to you.
Thank you, Heather, and welcome everyone. It's a real honor to be part of this esteemed group, and look forward to hearing from all the panelists in the coming minutes. My background, I'm a veteran, a 30-year veteran, a multi-generational veteran, and so this is an area that's very close to my heart, is helping veterans, and looking forward to discussing how open source software and what ConsenSys Health is doing to try to bridge the gap between needs and services of veterans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wood. Dr. Wood is our newest team member at ConsenSys Health officially, and we're just absolutely thrilled to have his leadership to benefit the Vichy vision and our clinical trials related activities. So now moving on to our last but absolutely not least, Dr. David Metcalf, who is from Global Blockchain Ventures and a member of ConsenSys Health's board of directors. Dr. Metcalf, over to you.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with you, Heather, and team. It's always good to come together and work with ConsenSys Health. And we're happy both with my hat on as a venture capitalist with Global Blockchain Ventures and a partner to think about how much open source software has changed the face and complexion of the technology industry, but also how it's changing people's lives. And that's what I love about some of the efforts that are going on to help veterans. With my other hat on at University of Central Florida, where I run a research laboratory, we get to help veterans every day with training and simulation projects and other efforts too that really have meaning, especially during times of COVID, to make sure that all of the training that's needed for safety and security is done. Standards have been a big part of our life and how we serve the government every day, either as an academic institution or how we make sure that we safeguard our investments against some of the shifting tides that might come and go of fads and trends within the technology space. We've always had a hand in standards making, and that's been part of our strategy for investment too. Even the way that I met half the people on this call are through some of the standards making bodies that we've served on together, whether IEEE or whether Mozilla or Linux, other places. And then also the idea of the first book that we wrote for HIMSS, as an association that is committed to standards too, was all of us coming together and working together to try and advance the state of the art and state of knowledge in the early projects in blockchain and healthcare, the title of the book that we many of us worked on together for HIMSS as an industry, a trade association. Those are all things that have kind of shaped both our sense of community and connection, and also the sense of longevity that what we're working on is not just going to be fly by night or something that goes away or is just part of a trend, but is going to have real enduring meaning for whoever we serve, whether it's patients or in this particular case, the veterans that we want to bring some of the top-notch innovation to from across the globe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Metcalf. It's been an honor to work with you for many years now, and we very much appreciate Global Blockchain Ventures' support for the Vichy initiative. So I'd like to initiate this discussion by providing the audience with a little bit more of a quick background on what precisely is the Vichy initiative. And then in a moment, I'll invite my colleague, Jim, to describe what it means to Linux Foundation Public Health. But the Vichy initiative is a partnership between ConsenSys Health and the Dixon Center for Military and Veterans Services. We view our role in that relationship as providing comprehensive cryptographic trust to a wide range of uniquely complex business, clinical, and population level mechanics that unfortunately leave many veterans behind today, where technological innovation seems to pass over the unique complexities that they face. We have an unusual and unprecedented opportunity to target the way that a new wave of paradigm shifting technologies impacts a population. And we've decided to do that together with our partners for veterans and their families. Vichy, as an initiative, will comprise a range of firsts for the industry, particularly in the United States market. We will be enabling self-sovereign identity, data sovereignty, and the ability for veterans to preserve their privacy while accessing care that can be stigmatizing. For example, in the area of suicidality, substance use disorder, military sexual trauma, and post-traumatic stress in a growing population of female veterans, and other scenarios where we believe our unique combination of privacy preserving technologies can have an immediate high value impact. Ultimately, our vision is the total wellness of this population, importantly, and always including veterans with their families and their caregivers. The initiative is well underway. This is among our first public activities in 2022, but this group I know you're going to hear more from. But let me turn it to you to describe, Jim, the Veterans Affairs Steering Committee and more detail about how you think it can add value in our collaboration to the Vichy initiative.
Absolutely. And first I'd add, in addition to being a veteran, I've had the opportunity before coming to Linux Foundation to work closely on patient-centric identity solution and the concepts of how those solutions can tie into new forms of consent. As you highlighted, Heather, and as I mentioned before, veterans have unique demographic and population health considerations and social determinants of health. And we're only now beginning to explore on a broad scale how to be able to enable patient identity, control of their identity and their consent as part of sharing that information, especially when there's critical socioeconomic, demographic, or other population health factors that must be considered as part of their clinical care. So specific to Linux Foundation Public Health, ConsenSys Health, and the Veterans Steering Committee, as with any such activity, having representations from senior advisors and stakeholders is critical, I think, to building the proper audience, identifying and prioritizing what their needs are, and being able to consider consensus-driven open source solutions in collaboration with other industry partners and ConsenSys Health, and building upon the type of technologies that we have in things like Linux Foundation Hyperledger, Linux Foundation AI, and the work we've done within Linux Foundation Public Health for supporting and working with public health authorities. So this steering committee, and I think as we've talked a bit about before, I think will really consist of representatives from the VA community, hopefully VA leadership, representatives from veteran service organizations, and other participants within the technology community, so that we make sure that we're addressing collectively potential open source digital health opportunities that are completely in line and prioritized with veterans' needs and the needs of the community in terms of implementation writ large. I think it'll be an exciting opportunity to also bring to bear what we've been doing across the thousands of projects that we have in Linux Foundation to the specific and unique needs of the veterans population and how VA stakeholders can weigh into utilizing them. I'm sure most of the participants here are aware of the fact that VA has been tremendously supportive of the open source community. And the VA Vista program as an open source electronic healthcare records is one of the largest and strongest in the world. And the VA has contributed heavily to that over the years. And so with that spirit in mind, as well as the avenues that we've been exploring both together and as part of the Linux Foundation Public Health, there are many different areas that open source tools could be leveraged as part of that ecosystem to address benefits of veterans' needs immediately.
Thank you so much, Jim. It really feels like such an impactful opportunity to drive public-private partnership and cross-sectional stakeholder engagement. We have so much alignment of vision. Colonel David Sutherland from Dixon Center has written about something he refers to as the sea of goodwill, where there's enormous energy from the public sector, across community care and healthcare delivery and payer organizations, and across hundreds, even thousands of philanthropic organizations focused on the needs of veterans. This opportunity to create a technology-driven personalization and integration and optimization of so much goodwill that somehow manages to not reach the audience intended today. We hope to activate and empower that with our partnerships. So this steering committee is going to play a vital role, and we thank you greatly for your leadership in establishing it, Jim. Thank you. So now, if we could turn to Daniela, you play a unique role leading healthcare industry strategy at Linux Foundation, not only within Hyperledger, but writ large. I'd love to hear your perspectives on what this can mean for the healthcare industry and your thoughts about this entire endeavor. Daniela.
Sure. I like to obviously echo a lot of what Jim has said, but also Dr. Metcalf had mentioned about how much open source has changed over the years. And the Linux Foundation actually for the last 20 years has been building these developer code communities that really span across different industries and different sectors and really important things that are critical to how technology impacts our day-to-day lives, whether it's in healthcare or in financial services or other divisions. I recently did a presentation for a bunch of fifth graders. This is my daughter's class, around what I did for a living. What do I do at the Linux Foundation? And I really spent some time trying to understand and explain in simple words for fifth graders what the impact is of the Linux Foundation and the open source communities that we have here is on them. Things from the Mars, the NASA Mars rover, right? That is a Linux Foundation, code project. It uses Linux Foundation, Linux kernel code to like the cool things. And I think I got the banner of the coolest mom in the room because I started talking about how things like Kubernetes and Cloud Native Foundation and other projects do TikTok and Instagram, and how these core systems are built with open source projects so that the developers come into the Linux Foundation projects, whether it's Hyperledger, Linux Foundation Public Health, Kubernetes, which sits under the Cloud Native Foundation, to build these solutions. It's really important to understand that our goal here at the Linux Foundation is to build the open source software. So the code itself that companies like ConsenSys Health and others, and will be used for Vichy initiative, the communities, right? That is also a communities of developers. So the developers that actually contribute the code and contribute the documentation or contribute the code fixes, that contribute the use cases and the templates for using those. And then the ecosystem, the commercial ecosystem to support these open source code bases and initiatives. And I think that's a really important aspect of the Linux Foundation and this partnership and how we work together with companies like ConsenSys Health, which helps support multiple projects here at Hyperledger. In Hyperledger, Linux Foundation Public Health, the Confidential Computing Consortium, is how do we come together, bring your developers, and a lot of government agencies have developers that contribute and participate in Linux Foundation projects. Today, there's over 1 billion line of code that has been contributed to the Linux Foundation across all our projects, across, over 20,000 companies, right, that have developers that are contributing and putting as core initiatives to contribute and participate to open source. I hope that with the leadership that, Jim St. Clair with his new, the Linux Foundation Public Health as executive director, and his experiences with veterans and with the industry as a whole from a government sector, we can also apply more resources and more opportunities for these communities to get together. So, I think as we think about how the veteran community and those building products and services for those veterans can participate, can contribute, it's really three things I like to say. One is developers. We want to have developers come into our community, and we have a lot of resources. If you're a developer and you want to understand how to use open source projects, the Linux Foundation training initiatives have a lot of free and certifications and training courses that people can take, and they can put their paths along how to become an open source developer, from things on how to be a maintainer, for example, or a contributor, to actually knowing the technologies across the board. Number two is for communities. It's not just of developers. Without subject matter experts like the folks that we have here on the phone today, and many that will be participating in this initiative, we have to understand what the requirements are from a regulatory perspective, from a privacy perspective, from a healthcare perspective. So there's a lot of ways that the community can get involved, and I look forward to exploring those with many of you here in the audience today.
Thank you so much, Daniela. We're greatly benefited having your leadership and vision involved in the Vichy endeavor. We can't thank you enough, and Jim, of course, for being part of making this real. So thank you so much. I'd like to now turn it back to you, Dr. Metcalf. I'm very interested in a few things. Those of us, I'm sure most on the line, are either deeply engaged in veteran affairs or perhaps in the blockchain community, or both. And there's been fascinating discussions about our whole industry iterating and ideating to find business models that are sustainable and that can work and that can function under this net new paradigm. Many of those structural changes that are brought about by blockchain cause asymmetries or misalignments with what I'll call traditional investment theses. I'd love to hear your point of view as the lead investor for Vichy, for the Vichy initiative, on how you see things differently, and how you see the community of investors being able to support driving endeavors like these.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. There's so much opportunity, and for many, many years, we've participated in projects that are public-private partnerships. And those public-private partnerships have a different complexion, different characteristic, because there are many stakeholders, just like you said. They have sometimes different goals, sometimes aligned, sometimes not. But what's common in that is that if you can meet those different stakeholders' goals, and maybe some of them are in the public good, maybe some of those are for returns too, if you're an investor, and meet all those, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can get the things done that need to be done to help society advance, to help our veterans, and at the same time, have the types of returns that an investor would expect. So some people think, well, that sounds like having your cake and eating it too, kind of an oxymoron, but those are the types of things that make some of the best projects and some of the best partnerships. And that's what we see here and what Vichy is doing. So that's part of why we were investing in it. Even the complexion of investing is changing too. If you would have said 20 years ago, hey, let's invest in this little open source project, Red Hat, too, and seeing what that was. But, now look, 20 years ahead, here we were 2 years ago. And, IBM is doing a purchase, not only a purchase, but really doubling down on what Red Hat stands for, and some of the ability to do some of the supporting and surrounding services around open source too, of publications, documentation, all of the community building that happens on that. And that even led to leadership within a company the size of IBM too. So those are things that are market indicators and trends that if you are an investor, you might look at when you think about, could I, have a double win, or a triple win, where we're advancing the cause of veterans' health, where we're advancing the cause of standards and some of the things that'll have longevity in our society, and of course, make the return that our investors are obviously expecting for the monies that they've been entrusted with and that they put in. That's also why nonprofit foundations can participate. That's why individuals can participate. And that's why, of course, the investment community can participate. So drawing funding from all of those sources, knowing that they're missionally aligned, is going to create capacity. And I see a lot of people on this call have done great things for our veterans, for our military. And so thankful that you decided to join us today too. And you all are part of what can make the investment, co-aligned investment that will move the needle on really advancing this cause for us.
Thank you, Dr. Metcalf. And a quick follow-on question for you. Outside of your role as an investor in the venture world, you also are an academic. You're a professor and you run a lab. That lab has served the VA in many important ways. And I'm wondering if you can share with our audience some of that work and how beyond the capital that Global Blockchain Ventures is providing, you have important contributions to the vision that you're making here as well.
I guess part of why we know what we want to invest in is because we get to see it, touch it, feel it up close in a laboratory environment before we kind of put $1 to something too, and make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And oftentimes that is because of standards. A lot of the standards we're working in are in the training and learning space. And during the height of COVID, for instance, the VA came to us and asked us if we would update all of the personal protective equipment training that's done for hundreds of thousands of people. And they not only decided to do it for themselves, but they decided to open it up to all healthcare providers too. So it got a pretty wide berth of use to make sure that people are protected every day. And to also make sure that those records, those training records, were going to be kept in such a way that you had ongoing standards-based access to those two, no matter what organization you're in, whether you're in the VA, whether you're in another part of the federal government or outside of the government and healthcare organization. Those are the types of things that blockchain solutions help with because of the continuity, because you can put a smart contract in place that actually allows you to have just the information you need, no more, no less, no matter what your stakeholder value proposition is inside of there. So that's an example of some of the work that we've been doing at the Mixed Emerging Technology Integration Lab at University of Central Florida to try and do our small part to help veterans and to help those that serve veterans, all of our healthcare providers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Metcalf, and thank you for those contributions to accelerating the needs of the VA and the veteran population. It's always been a pleasure working with you. It's so exciting to be on this journey for Vichy together. So with that, I'd like to turn it to Dr. Wood, Vichy's executive director within ConsenSys Health. Dr. Wood, you have a very unique perspective as a physician and a veteran. And also, I'll say, because you're a very humble person and may not go into that, a prolific researcher and transformative visionary on the subject of digital health and the transformation from telehealth in terms of including core seminal research facilitating that transformation, which has happened inside military health faster and earlier than it happened in the general community at large. I would love to hear you explain your point of view to the audience, both as a veteran and as a physician, everything that you uniquely can see, and also what that means to your research work that you've done over the course of your career. Over to you, Dr. Wood.
Thank you, Heather. Well, goodness, that's quite a question. With my physician hat on, I've been taking care of veterans in the military health system for over 20 decades. I did leave that role about a year and a half ago, though. But over those years, I can tell you that some of the challenges that we have as healthcare providers, and that's not unique to the military health system, but it has to do with access to data, access to information. And so when soldiers or veterans seek their care outside of the military health system or the VA, getting access to those critical records are sometimes quite challenging. And likewise, as a veteran myself, I get my care through the VA system, and navigating that system is quite complex. So healthcare, both as a provider and as a veteran, it's a very complex landscape, and navigating that really requires some sort of avatar to help you navigate that, or some sort of a guide. And that's one of the things that I see that technology and agents perhaps can help us navigate the vast wilderness that is the complexities of healthcare. As a physician, most of what we focus on is in diagnostics, right? While we're interested in the overall wellness of our patients, and that's emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, environmental, financial, all the various domains of what it means to be well. As clinicians, we're usually particularly focused on diagnostics and all these other domains that are so important in the overall wellness of an individual. Our healthcare IT systems often don't capture them in ways that make any of that information actionable. That's one of the things that I'm very excited about the Vichy project and working specifically with the Dixon Center is there are so many great opportunities that the community has made available to veterans. I mean, it's literally in the thousands that address so many of these spheres of what it means to be well. And what do I mean by that? Well, as a veteran, when I go into the Veterans Hospital, I may not be aware that there's literally hundreds of community opportunities to be engaged with fellow veterans. That may be anything from recreational activities to scuba diving, to sailing lessons, to riding, to learn how to be a rider. There's just tremendous wealth of opportunities out there. Even, online yoga classes. All this may sound trivial, but from my standpoint as a provider and as a patient, having access and knowing what's available out there is one of the problems that we face within the medical community as physicians, because we don't know all this is available. And I would venture to say that many veterans don't realize what's available. So being able to partner with an organization like the Dixon Center, that is a clearinghouse for the tens of thousands of veteran service organizations, and using technology to be able to match needs with what those resources are, is a very exciting opportunity. And with that, I'll pause.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. You outline almost the defining use case for artificial intelligence, which is optimization and prediction. And an important element of what we're doing in the Vichy initiative is unblocking data access while providing a framework for trustworthy and confidential computing that can conform with both the letter of the law and the spirit and intent of privacy regulation. This opportunity is enormous, and we're so glad to be able to offer this population access to this privacy preserving technology first, instead of somewhere down the line. That means a great deal to us. So I think with that, we do want to make sure that we leave ample time for audience Q&A. And believe it or not, we've got some great questions coming in that I think will be many panelists will be interested in sinking their teeth into. So with that, I'd like to go through a round of closing remarks with each of our panelists, and then we'll begin the audience facilitated Q&A segment. I'd like to start with you, Daniela. If you want to take a minute or so and react to anything your fellow panelists have had to say, or sum your contribution. You are muted.
I'm still new at this Zoom thing. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the questions that are coming in are things that Jim and I will love to, dig a little deeper into as well. But ultimately, it is really important to understand that initiatives like this come together when organizations, whether they're nonprofits or for commercial properties and others, get together and find a reason to use technology to better the systems, the experiences, for example, that people might have around data and privacy and security. So I think, one of the things that is important for everybody here to understand is that the Linux Foundation, through projects like the Linux Foundation Public Health Initiative, is a place to come and start those communities, start those discussions, and meet like-minded people that maybe are not experts in veterans affairs, for example, but we're experts in how technology can be applied and how we build communities that long-term produce commercialization of these technologies and services to communities as the veterans community. So once again, very excited about that. And I think we'll dig a little deeper into how we go about doing that.
Thank you very much, Daniela. And over to you, Jim.
Well, thank you. I would just emphasize that more and more of traditional private healthcare is being integrated into Veterans Care's process flows and scenarios under the Mission Act, which means that, of course, not only do we get to address the priorities around the unique healthcare requirements for veterans, but that many of these things that we may be implementing or solutions that we develop have applicability for other healthcare scenarios as well. And in a day and age when we are very focused on the concepts of health equity and how digital health solutions can promote health equity, and most importantly, not introduce inequity into a scenario, I think a lot of the work that we're doing and a lot of the work that we envision to do together, specifically aimed at veterans, can grow to help population health characteristics and requirements overall.
Thank you so much, Jim. And your closing remarks, Dr. Wood. Before the Q&A, we will all be reacting to our audience questions. Please proceed.
Sure. I would like everyone to pause for a moment and ask yourself, what's the most important data that you have? And I would argue that it's your healthcare data and your social determinants of health and wellness, whatever that means to you as an individual. But historically, our healthcare systems, that we don't have access to that data as individuals. We have much more access to our financial data than our healthcare data. And so I'm very much looking forward to this project. And one of many things associated with the project is giving veterans access to their data in a way that they've never enjoyed before. And that opens up all sorts of second and third order effects of how we can help veterans as a community. And then that can be translated on to other communities as well.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Absolutely. And Dr. Metcalf.
Yeah, well, I look at both the panelists as well as the people that have chosen to come to this seminar today too. And I say, for all the talk about technology and standards, a lot of what we look at comes down to people. Look at the people that are here that care about this, that are coming from the stellar team that, Heather, you've assembled through ConsenSys Health, that the veterans have assembled through Colonel Sutherland and the Dixon Center, and through the standards making bodies, as well as the investors that are like-minded that we've tried to bring to the table to do this. Everyone has a stake in this, but it all comes down to the people coming to something like this, working together towards a common good, and figuring out how we can solve some of the difficult problems that only certain technologies can solve. That's what's exciting about this too, and what you've assembled here today by bringing us together. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Metcalf. All right, I know our Q&A segment is going to go quickly. I'd like to open up the topic of cybersecurity as our first principle. This is not in the order the question came in, but it's a vital subject that we have an opportunity to address here. I'd first like to myself comment that the entirety of our architectures, from confidential computing to decentralization, have enhancements, radical enhancements to cybersecurity over baseline as first principles. The changing of incentives for reaching honeypots, centralized honeypots of data is one of the most powerful defense mechanisms that we can create. And there are many more layers of advanced cryptography and other models involved with our approach. I'd like to first direct this question regarding cybersecurity. Interestingly, with your experience, Dr. Metcalf, in public-private partnerships and the ABCs, which I know you'll explain, the party who asked this question is from the UK government, NHS, working in healthcare on cybersecurity. I'd love for you to take that question first, and then I will open it up to the other panelists to no doubt pile on. Dr. Metcalf. Yeah,
such a big question too, and we get to face it every day too, especially since where you're coming from asking that question too. Through HIMSS, an international organization, we've been able to address some of that. What are the differences between GDPR over in the European community and TEFCA over here in the States, and what does privacy look like in different regions and geographies based on regulatory, but also based on what are those needs. We get to address that every day, and the value of healthcare data, as both Jim and Dr. Wood said, is skyrocketing. It's more valuable than credit card data online now on the black market. So that the care we should take with it should be commensurate. Some of the things that we're doing from the government side and looking at those next generation of standards, working with the standards bodies, is what does replacements for some of the current encryption standards look like? What's NIST working on, NSA, other groups that we're seeing, and you hear the words quantum-based or quantum defensible for some of the attacks we might have in the future too at the raw root level, and also making sure that we train and educate people, because I've heard a few people say the 8th layer is where the human layer is where most of the attacks actually happen too. The social engineering, or how we are not safe with our cyber hygiene. These things are every bit as important as the technology standards we put in at the application layer, the network layer, the infrastructure layer. So those are all things that are very important if we want to protect those areas. You asked me to say one other thing too, and that's ABC. So a lot of my colleagues in the government and military say, please just, do the things that we really need. Keep this as simple as possible. ABC, AI, blockchain, and cyber. How do you have the perfect trifecta of those different areas of advanced compute and capability coming together? So we're trying to honor that thought of, let's keep it something that is human-centric and that humans can really understand, but also that has all of those fundamental elements covered within the solution space we look at.
Thank you, Dr. Metcalf. Couldn't agree more passionately. I think maybe, Daniela, it would be ideal if you could unpack the new cybersecurity initiative under the Linux Foundation umbrella.
Actually, I'm going to pass that over to Jim, because Jim has been working very closely with some of our, government key stakeholders as well. So Jim, if you want to address that, that'd be great.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Daniela. Yes, to Daniela's point, what Heather was mentioning, as we mentioned in the Q&A, Linux Foundation's made a significant investment in the Open Source Security Foundation, and that is addressing pressing issues such as the Log4j vulnerability, but most importantly, implementing new steps to embed security, code security, security review processes through the open source software lifecycle. And we see tremendous opportunities for improving security across the board just with implementing that mindset. The Linux Foundation is very heavily involved in something called the Software Bill of Materials, the SBOMs, which is an initiative that has grown out of federal agency guidance and is now embedded in the president's executive order. The healthcare community, healthcare sector has a specific focus or dedicated working group looking at the implementation of Software Bill of Materials for healthcare, and I participate as part of that group. It is an area that unfortunately can't be prioritized enough, and enough time can't be invested into making sure that secure software coding and development principles are built in at every step that any software solution is offered, be it proprietary or open source, and one which the Linux Foundation takes very seriously and is involved with leading at the highest levels.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. There are a number of questions in the chat that get at different global expansion or global requirements. And I just would like to quickly comment that our hope, after validating effectiveness of the Vichy initiative for U.S. veterans and their families and caregivers, we very much hope to arrive at public-private partnership models with governments around the world that are U.S. allies to provide support for service members around the world. It'd naturally be a subsequent phase of our endeavor, but this is a global problem with jurisdiction specific requirements, but that's definitely part of the vision. The next question I would love for us to take. So we have a question about what open source assets are going to be part of the Vichy initiative. It's frankly a long list. There's more than 30 that I can't recite off the top of my head, but it spans from Kubernetes to Hyperledger Bezu to Hyperledger Avalon to Intel's OpenFL federated learning framework to many more. So there's lots under the hood there. There are questions to the effect of A question from Dr. Farrar from the VA. Hello, Dr. Farrar. Thank you for contributing a question. Do you consider data interoperability to be a driver for emerging technologies to focus on? Yes, among open source assets, we're talking about open sourced FHIR servers. Fundamentally, that's Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, FHIR, and HL7 standard. And we are absolutely capitalizing on what we believe is excellent regulation driving data access to consumers, including veterans who receive the vast majority of all their care outside of the VA through the final stages of implementation of the 21st Century Cures Act and the anti-information blocking provisions. The VA has been ahead of the curve on that through implementations of the Lighthouse API under the Mission Act. So between the VA's early leadership on veteran data access and now moving into the enforcement investigation provisions of anti-information blocking in the US market, we have the opportunity to help veterans and citizens generally assemble, aggregate, curate, and ultimately, we hope, monetize and use for their own clinical benefit health data as defined by HIPAA-covered entities. Importantly, though, we're talking about health relevant data, which means social determinant data. It means all the data about a person that they can assemble. So interoperability certainly is a factor, but there's nothing magical about blockchain technology that changes semantic data structures. We're really looking at how do we drive normalization of data at rest and move away from needing to move and centralize data in order to perform that normalization and the subsequent analyses that derive data results. So on the subject of interoperability and what it means to Vichy, are there other members of the team that would like to contribute some thoughts on that?
Heather, I'd welcome a chance. Actually, David, go ahead first, sir.
No, you go ahead. Yeah,
I appreciate that. As someone who's been involved in health data interoperability, HL7, IHE, and other standards groups for a long time, I'd say one of the things that you were speaking to, Heather, that I think is critically important with your initiatives and with emerging technologies is new incentivization models. To me, one of the biggest hindrances for health data interoperability hasn't been the standards or the systems for sharing the information. It's been the incentives for how that information was shared in the first place. Understandably, in the private sector, a private sector healthcare organization may not be incentivized to provide data interoperability if it means you're going to a doctor down the street. But these new emerging technologies, and especially some of these underpinnings that you mentioned, things we're doing in Hyperledger and others in Linux Foundation, are changing that incentivization with Web3 and other emerging technologies. That incentivization, I think, helps drive interoperability because you have new models for how that information is used and recognizing the value of that information. David, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Yeah, I was going to speak at the application layer too, that some of the things that we're seeing in our projects also address that need for data interoperability for equity and for, kind of the social justice side of things too, and how that data is used, how it might be sold by, out from underneath people who are underrepresented. Some of the transparency provided by blockchain solutions and standards really addresses that. We have a project from the NIH that Dr. Dexter Hadley here, our head of AI for our College of Medicine, is leading, that is looking at that for COVID imaging and how that's used and making sure it's not misused, and that everybody who has a stake in that has some equal say. And also, if there is payment for those records, then they have a share in that too. So to bring it to an application level, the COVIDimaging.com project is an example of that, as is some of the work that we're doing right now with the Army, where they wanted us to put together a blockchain and quantum defense simulator. So we can simulate some of these things and look at how the standards interoperate before they get out into deployment in the field and see where there are opportunities to advance the state of the art, but still be conforming to the needs of a particular constituent, not just the military, because this is open to industry to use as well as other parts of the government and associations. It's not just for the military, but it was set up initially by them because they saw this need for the stakeholder engagement and the ability to assess those across multiple categories of need within that interoperability.
Thank you, Dr. Metcalf. Jumping on to our next question, there's there's what use cases do we believe, use cases would best demonstrate the first order or first milestones of effectiveness that we hope we can hit. And just as a quick framing, we think of this in terms of horizontal use cases and vertical use cases. Horizontal use cases involve how do we build human relational trust to pair with cryptographic trust to actually onboard veterans into a new infrastructure. And that's foundational to our partnership with Dixon Center on how we achieve that, and outfitting with decentralized identities and providing an infrastructure to take custody of what will become self-sovereign data. Vertical use cases in terms of particular clinical scenarios, we have a hypothesis that our advanced privacy preservation creates an opportunity to change access to care patterns around certain high priority disease states and conditions. And I'd like to turn it to Dr. Wood to please address some of those stigmatizing scenarios where we hypothesize we can make an impact fast. Dr.
Sure.
Wood?
Thank you, Heather. When we look at the wellness domains, there's tremendous overlap, for example, for sexual assault, for PTSD, for TBI, for depression, anxiety, and suicidality. So where all those overlap is in the broad sense of behavioral health. So we see various modalities of behavioral health that the technology can facilitate by privacy preserving and destigmatizing. So as a specific disease state, we haven't identified one specific, but we see tremendous overlaps in the domains of wellness for all the things I just mentioned that lend themselves very well to this new technology.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wood. And we have a question from who I believe is Dr. Boodoo. Prior to becoming a veteran, most time spent on active duty and are exposed to chemicals, have PTSD, are injured, etc. Would love to hear thoughts on how to better track or create smart contract-based registries to enable AI. And that notion and a particular way of getting at that problem is integral to the vision of Vichy. The ability to cryptographically assure the identity of a data subject, the integrity and longitudinality of the data itself, and the ability to normalize it on ingest into person-centered self-sovereign data stores is fundamental to how we could then activate decentralized artificial intelligence modalities that are facilitated by blockchain at the access control layer. It's a very, very important point. Any quick remarks from the panelists on that matter of AI blockchain convergence at the heart of Vichy? Anyone on the panel?
I think the data locker that we envision and the federated learning gets right to the essence of that, because if the veteran has a secure data locker on their device, they don't have to share the data with federated learning. Algorithms for AI can be sent to their devices. So that's one of the very exciting opportunities that we see coming up soon, hopefully.
You highlight, Dr. Wood, another hybrid scenario. We're talking about a public-private hybrid blockchain environment. We're talking about public-private partnership hybrids. We're also talking about local to the device edge data stores and secure cloud enclave data stores, hybridized. So I wonder how many
there's a trend going on here.
I hear lots of hybrids. Absolutely.
I would say one other thing too on that even at the fundamental layer where we're trying to help a veteran who might be in a rural area, the policies have changed. The laws have changed about what you can and can't do to go and see a private provider. But that adds a lot of complexity. That complexity can be, in essence, transparent to the veteran and make it easy by having an artificial intelligence layer that goes and assesses what things are covered, what things aren't covered, maybe even in real time or very near real time, right at the point of need, point of care. And knowing some of those things and having that acceleration, that speed, only can come because of having good access to standardized data that's decentralized, so that there's decentralized control of that, and this smart intelligence that AI filters can provide to, which providers could you go to, what are their ratings, which one's closest to you, and which ones are allowable by the VA based on 50-mile radius to be able to do that. There's a complex formula there that can be seen as very easy and very easy access if we have the right interface and the right tools to help our veterans.
Thank you, Dr. Metcalf. I'm seeing a number of questions that get at a common theme of where does this self-sovereign data sit, and how in fact would we purport to create a legal framework that assures private ownership and technological privacy of that data. Briefly, the Vichy initiative will be deploying something called the HERO mobile application suite. HERO, HERO, Health Enhancing Resource Orchestration. How you like that one? Isn't that the best acronym ever? We have to credit that to our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Mannion. But the HERO mobile application suite will provision a private data locker. ConsenSys Health will never see or know or be able to view the information in those private data lockers, though we will provide the governance, the infrastructure, and the entire surrounding apparatus to ensure that the self-sovereign individual or their custodian or delegate can, in fact, govern that information. There was a comment in the questions about the data ownership game and when are we getting into it, or who's getting into it. To be clear, Vichy will be driving that agenda aggressively. And our position is that the spirit and intent of access to information about you that's set forth in the GDPR, the CCPA, and pending regulation across US states, it means that you shouldn't have to opt out of a massively technological culture in order to preserve your privacy. And we have new opportunities to affect that. Will other panelists jump in here on this question of data ownership in our position, or any other matter related to that you'd like to comment on?
Heather, I'll comment real quick on that, not necessarily just from ownership, but just from a consent standpoint. And I know there was some discussion around GDPR and HIPAA and the like, but when we start getting into these issues of social determinants of health, behavioral health, that further complicates who has ownership of the data and what the regulations are that govern it. For those folks who know that HIPAA, the CFR Part 2 data around behavioral health is governed a little bit differently than other parts of clinical information are. On any particular state level, there are different rules around how community-based organizations or social services share their data, and they don't necessarily align either. So I think from my perspective, one of the exciting aspects of Vichy and getting into this specific to the veterans use case is the degree to which we can work, and potentially through the steering committee, and come up with policy and regulatory recommendations that help unify and standardize some of this, so that for any given veteran between multiple states, multiple VA medical centers, that they are able to follow the same rules around sharing this to maintain that continuity in care delivery.
Thank you so much, Jim. Very, very exciting stuff. We are at time. We have a couple of announcements. Those of you who registered for this event will be receiving access to a Slack channel to engage in the ongoing dialogue with Linux Foundation Public Health about the Veterans Affairs Steering Committee and the Vichy Initiative. We look forward to meeting you there and engaging, and encourage all of you to expect to hear more from us. We have a lot to learn from the veterans community about how to best meet their uniquely complex needs. We're honored to engage across the public and private sector to achieve that aim. With that, thank you to all of those who participated. To the questions we couldn't get to, we will follow up with you offline, and we appreciate that. And lastly, thank you to my very esteemed co-panelists and partners. We can't thank you enough for taking the time today to unpack Vichy to the world and its relationship to the open source software community. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone.
All right, we are adjourned. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.